Welcome to Bouncing Back, the Bonnie and Katrina Radio Show, with practical ways we can lead healthier and happier lives. Today's topic, get a grip, healthy ways to handle anger. And now here's your hosts, Bonnie and Katrina.
Okay, so Katrina, before we get started on Anger Day, did I tell you about when I was taking my mom to the doctors the other day?
No.
Remember she was sick and she was in the hospital, so I was taking her for a follow-up visit at the doctor's office. And then she doesn't walk. She's already a paraplegic. So here I'm driving this handicapped van with a scooter in it, trying to get her to the doctor's. And she's going, oh, careful. Oh. Every time I just even turn the wheel a little bit. So I was a nervous wreck. Anyways, I was coming really slowly off this light, and this jerk just nailed me on the horn. He was just laid on it. I was so upset, Katrina, I flipped him off.
Okay. This is so
But
out
listen,
of Bonnie's
it just gets
character.
so much worse.
Wait, let me explain to everybody. You guys, just so you can get a picture in your head of what was going on here. Picture your sweet little kind innocent grandmother flipping somebody the bird. That's the picture here.
Now, I'm not a grandma yet, but I do have a pretty substantial hope chest. It's all up to the kids.
Fair
enough. But listen, I wanted to tell you, what happened after that was the scary part. Because this guy just went berserko. He gunned it, went into the bike lane, sped in front of me, cut me off, and then hit the brakes. That scooter came up, hit my chair, hit the chair next to it. Honest to God, we were scared to death. I couldn't believe it. So do you think people are angrier than they used to be?
What a jerk. Okay.
I know I am.
On that note, thank you for your road rage story, Bonnie. We're excited to have Dr. Ari Novick join us to teach us all how to get a grip on anger. Dr. Ari Novick is a licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of the AJ Novick Group. Not only has he authored several books on the subject of stress, anger, and effective parenting skills, his firm is a leading trainer in the area of anger management, and he is here to share some valuable insights that we all can use. Thank you, Dr. Novick, for joining us today. We are really excited to have you help us find some healthier ways to manage our anger and frustration and apparently get Bonnie's road rage under control.
That's right. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks so much for having me on the show, Bonnie and Katrina. I appreciate it. And God, I'll do my best to try to get your road rage under control. We'll have to see.
It's going to be quite
I think
the
actually the best person to get your road rage under control would be you. But we'll see if I can give you some suggestions on how to best do that.
Well, can you tell me, why is it that perfectly nice people lose it on the road?
Well, I think there's a few reasons why perfectly nice people lose it on the road. One, there's an impersonal element that occurs when you're driving. You don't know that other driver, and it's kind of easy to hide behind, the security of being inside your car. I think that the dangerous thing that most people don't think about in road rage situations is that you really don't know what the mental status is of the person that you might get angry with. And they might follow you home, they might have a gun, they might do something really dangerous. And then it might become very personal. And that's when you see, fights break out on the freeway and people, getting shot and things like that. So it's really important to keep your cool when you're driving, even if someone does something that you don't like or you think is stupid or...
I know, that's really scary stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, and more common than it used to be, it seems to me, too. So what are the most common things that tend to set people off? We know road rage is one. Are there some other issues that really...
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily, if we could sort of list like the top 5
top 5 anger issues,
the triggers that people have. But I think that there are certainly emotions that come up for people that make them ultimately default to anger. And I think first off, it's important to recognize that anger, not always, but typically will be a secondary emotion to something else that precedes it. So if you really think about, a time that you got angry, and we'll use your road rage incident as an example, think about how did you feel right before you got angry? What was the emotion that you experienced? Do you remember?
Right, because I was so frustrated and I was scared too with my mom. So there was some fear going on. And then this guy came out and threw that additional pressure and frustration on me.
So really what it wasn't so much that you were angry. That was the secondary, that was the byproduct of feeling scared.
Interesting.
And that's usually what happens for most people is that they will feel scared or worried or intimidated or attacked. And instead of being able to somehow express that emotion, although it's difficult, when you're driving, they'll act in an angry, hostile way because that's a more primitive way to deal with our, that emotional reaction.
So you had all of that going on, and he was just basically the icing on the cake. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
To make her snap into that
I think that
hand gesture?
I don't think it was personal, right? Because you didn't know this gentleman, who was driving this other car. It was just, it was circumstantial, and it happened to be this
and who
person.
knows what's going on with him? Like, why would he have gone that ballistic over some granny flipping him off? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe he had a terrible grandmother. I don't know. Whatever.
Maybe. But it's like what I said before. You never quite know what the, state of another person is.
Right. So just be careful out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real dangerous.
I have another question for you. This one actually comes from my daughter in North Carolina. She works as a restaurant manager, and what she wanted me to ask you is, why do people go crazy over such little things like when you're in the service industry? She says it could just be something like, I ordered no cheese on my burger, and they'll just absolutely lay into her. My daughter is so sweet. What is the best way that she could handle some unreasonable customer getting out of control?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that someone who's unreasonable, you're likely not going to be able to reason with.
Okay, that's fair.
So the best way to deal with an unreasonable person is to try to use as much empathy as possible. And an example of that might be with an unreasonable customer to say to them, sir or ma'am, I can see how frustrated and annoyed you are that you didn't get cheese on your hamburger. And, I can understand feeling like that's just a horrible thing to have happen, especially when you were looking forward to having a great meal here. Let's see what we can do for you.
We are going to go fire the chef immediately. You wait right there. Just
kidding.
Right.
Pass it forward.
Yeah. I mean, while that may be a little more invasive than I was thinking, that is a solution.
Well, that's probably why she's doing so well, because she is able to take a lot of that, but she does internalize a lot of it too and brings it home, and it's just not a feel-good thing for her when she's, and it really cuts down on her enjoyment of her work.
It's hard. Being a server is a rough job. I did it for many years, and you wouldn't believe, how upset people get over cheese or rye bread over white or whatever.
Right.
So moving on, are anger issues more common in men or women?
Well, I think we have to sort of define what an issue is. Is it angry feelings are more common, or is it angry behaviors that are more common? Because
okay, so are there some people that are more prone to violence?
Well, yeah, there are people that are more prone to violence, and what the research shows is people who are exposed to violence, as children, are likely going to be more violent as adults. So typically when you are dealing with someone that's behaving in a violent way, likely they've had a history of violent behavior and a history of violence in childhood.
So it's definitely learned. Is there any that's innate?
Well, behaviors are learned.
Okay.
And there's a fundamental difference between behaviors and personality traits or characteristics, which is what I think you were referring to. Yes. Genetics will sometimes dictate, our personality, but behaviors are things that we pick up from our environment, from a very early age.
Right,
and
which is why those parenting classes that you do too. I mean, nobody gives us classes on how to do that and undoing the things that maybe have been learned. Very, very difficult thing to do.
Sure, you're right. You don't get a handbook, at the hospital when your kids are born. And even if you did, it might not work so well. So, and typically what most people do is they will parent the way they were parented, because that's all you know.
Right.
Because I said so. Okay. Is it possible for someone to lose control once, just once, and never again? I mean, like seeing red, for example, in a domestic violence issue? Or is that something that if it happens once, it always escalates?
Well, I don't think something always happens.
Okay.
I don't really like to use words like always or must be or never, because that indicates that a definitive. But I do think that, if there's a history of violence with a particular individual, history is the best predictor of the future. So if I had to say, okay, well, do I think this person's going to behave in a violent way? Does their history show that? And if their history shows that, then there's probably a pretty good chance of that happening. Now, if someone has no history of violent behavior and they had a one-time, just freak out, then again, we'd look at their history. Does this person have a history of violent behavior? No. Then maybe it was a one-time incident, where they just lost their cool. But typically, when you look at situations where there's, domestic violence occurring, there's usually a co-occurring issue of drugs or alcohol or, other things that might be happening that are contributing to that person's lack of judgment or impulse control.
I guess the question that I have for you is that I don't generally tend to be outright in my anger. I mean, that flipping off thing, that was one thing, but I generally tend to avoid it, and I hold anger in. Is it a terrible thing to do this? Is holding back a good idea before you do or say something you regret?
Well, if I had to choose between behaving aggressively or, being avoidant, I suppose I would choose avoidance. But, that's sort of like asking, is it better to jump in a pool of vomit or a pool of diarrhea? They're both bad.
I'm going to have to think on that one.
Ponder that for a moment.
That's disgusting, by the way.
Yeah, well, I just need to give you a good visual. So, neither one is necessarily a good thing. Ultimately, what you'd want to be able to do is do neither of those things and be able to communicate your feelings and needs, assertively and more appropriately, rather than holding it in. And, while being avoidant of you're maybe not having a conflict, but you're also not resolving conflict. So,
are there some tips that you can give us to help create a balance between holding it in and lashing out? Are there some steps in between there? I know you said assertive communication is the name to the game. What are some steps to get? We're both very passive aggressive, which makes for a fabulous partnership.
My whole family's that way.
It works for us, actually.
There's no conflict.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, lots of landmines, but no conflict.
Yeah, but even passive aggressive, communication is problematic.
Absolutely.
Mostly because passive aggressive, if we're going to generalize and say passive aggressive people or passive aggressive communicators, they usually do it without even knowing they're doing it. It's not always conscious. And it comes in two forms, right? It's either the use of a lot of sarcasm or pretending like everything is fine, but then doing something that's not nice. As both
or one
Bonnie
for one.
and Katrina are looking at each other, both raising their hand to that.
That'd be me.
And
Nailed
so,
it.
The avoidant communicator, the passive aggressive communicator, the aggressive communicator, they're all not great styles. But getting back to your question, Katrina, about, what are some tips or steps you can take, and really learning how to communicate well is probably the biggest one. And I think that for a lot of people, good communication skills have never really been learned, mostly because we learn how to communicate from our family of origin. And if you grew up in a family where there was a lot of passive aggressive activity going on, likely that's what you're going to do. As you grow up. If there was a lot of arguing and yelling, that may be sort of a predominant style that you have to resolve conflict, and so on and so forth. So really, gaining some skills in assertiveness is critical, as kind of one of the biggest things.
Okay, let me just stop us for just a moment. We need to go to a commercial break and thank the people that make this show possible. We'll be right back.
Serving all of Orange County since 2010, MB Studio Services is a radio broadcast production facility based in Costa Mesa, California. We specialize in production support for radio producers, voiceover artists, and podcasters. Our ISDN line is available for short notice radio interviews and voiceover projects. We also offer vinyl and cassette digitizing. MB Studio Services, 949-877-6761. That's 949-877-6761. Or email us at mbstudioservices@gmail.com.
Great. We're here with Dr. Ari Novick discussing anger management. And I'd like to continue with another question, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
All right.
Fire away.
So what is the single most important thing to do when you feel an argument is getting out of hand? When you feel that anger welling up in you, you feel you might lose it?
Well, that's a great question. Katrina, and I get asked that question a lot, actually. Like, what do I do when I'm, feel myself, about to explode?
On the edge, yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually something that's physiologically happening too. It's not just your thoughts. It's a combination of thoughts and feelings. And in your brain, there's some brain chemistry that's at play also. There's a little almond-shaped structure in your brain called your amygdala. And when you get really angry, your amygdala gets hijacked, so to speak, and it affects your judgment and your impulsivity, similar to when you've been drinking. And so when you get really angry, there comes a point in all of us where you're able to think clearly, you're able to think clearly, and then you cross the line and you no longer can think clearly. So what do? Well, if it's an intimate relationship, meaning like it's with a friend or a significant other or a family member, you might be able to say to that person, hey, I think I need to take a time out or a break from this situation because I'm afraid if we continue, I might say or do something I'm going to regret, and I don't want that to happen. How about we meet or get together and then you get an agreement on a specific time and place that you will continue the conversation. It has to be a reasonable amount of time, no less than maybe 30 or 40 minutes, but no more than a few hours. It takes the human body about 30 or 40 minutes to physiologically get back to homeostasis, back to normal. But hours or days is sort of mean, so.
Right, and that was one of the weird things with my husband has a very that's his natural reaction. If things start heating up, he's out. He's like, he gives himself a timeout. But the thing is he feels better when he comes back, but we don't continue the conversation. Mm-hmm. He forgot what we were fighting about. Meanwhile, I'm back at home building the litany and my argument as to why he was at fault for this thing.
Sure.
And he walks back in completely unprepared. So coming back and actually resolving it seems like the harder part, because once it's not right in his, in his immediate attention, he's off, sanding a table in the garage. He's forgotten all about the whole thing. And
we've talked about this before too. We actually, Bonnie and I discussed timeouts a little bit. And remember, you were saying when he puts himself on the timeout, you're still screaming down the hallway.
Oh, you have to be in the garage. And while you're thinking about it, think about this too. It's like.
Well, and there have to be some rules to the timeout, okay? And I talk a lot about this, both in my book, but also in the classes that we teach at our agency.
Tell us the name of your book.
It's Anger Management in the 21st Century. You can find it on Amazon or on our website. The idea with properly taking a timeout is that there are some rules in doing that. So the way that you were describing how your husband was doing it, while that may be effective for him, it's not really fair to you because you don't know how long he's leaving for, when he's going to return, and if the topic's going to be discussed again. So
that's right.
That's not really fair play. So I like to have the timeout, have some parameters, which are letting the other person know that they're going to take the timeout, how long they're going to be gone for, and when they're going to meet with you again to discuss the topic, and you both are in agreement about it. And then you need to let that person go. That person needs to go.
No screaming down the hallway.
Right. And then, of course, there's some other basic rules to it, like neither one of you can drink or use drugs, right? No brainers there. And also be careful who you talk to. Sometimes there's a tendency to want to, call your sister, brother, mother, father, someone in your family to get support, and you complain about that person. Oh my God, Paul just did this horrible thing, and now that you're getting all this love and support from your family member, and then you guys make up, and then you show up at your next Christmas party and your family's treating him terribly because they think he's a real jerk for the way he treated you. So you have to be careful, how much you communicate to your family.
Right. That's in our family. I'm almost 30 years married, and if I ever tried to triangulate my family in, they'd all take his side. So I've never
You're safe.
attempted to do that.
You're safe. Well, and I always used to say that too when I grew up, The thing you don't know when you're a child is you never tell your mother when you're in a fight with your best friend when you're a little kid, because now she doesn't like that best friend. Mm-hmm. And you're a little kid, in 2 hours you're going to be friends again.
Of course.
Right, yeah.
And it's similar principle.
So on your website, you wrote that anger can also contribute to self-destructive behaviors like drugs and alcohol, and you put in there overeating. That's something that actually struck me, because I never really thought about overeating in the same category as drug or alcohol abuse.
So Ben and Jerry's, drug and alcohol abuse. If you could address that for us, that would be great.
Sure. Ben or Jerry,
Mine's a tub of Chubby Hubby Ben and Jerry's, so I don't know what your poison is, but that's mine.
Yeah, basically, for a lot of people, when they get angry, they sometimes will default to bad habits. Bad habits might be drugs. Bad habits might be alcohol. Bad habits might be binge eating.
Is that physiological with the amygdala and all that too, or what?
Well, I think that I do think that there's a physiological component to it, but we tend to revert back to, older, more primitive behaviors when we get really angry, and it's easy to default back to, addictive behaviors.
Is that because that's a comfort? It's
Yes.
almost like comfort food or comfort.
Yeah, I mean, it's an escape, right?
Okay.
I mean, when you're really angry and you want to just, you can't handle it anymore. That's why most people use drugs and alcohol, is to escape from dealing with how they really feel. And oftentimes when we overeat, we're, sort of drowning ourselves in food rather than addressing real feelings. And so that's why, overeating, not that it's meant to be lumped in with substance abuse, because it's different, but there's some mechanisms in that are similar.
And of course, I do know, you do feel better when you just comfort. Food is comforting.
Eat Chubby Hubby Ben and Jerry's. Yes, like I said.
But
we have to resist
similar
it.
to the drug user, you don't feel good the next day.
That's
No,
true.
that's true. Or, when
Or
you
half
step
an
on
hour
the-
later,
Yeah.
right?
Or you try to buckle your jeans up.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like, oh, God.
If I said something that hurt somebody that I care about, what can I do to make it right? Let's say it was really, really awful. Let's say I got
You
got to that. Thank you. I got to that anger point, and something spewed out. I didn't mean it to. Is it that once it's said, it cannot be undone?
Well, you can't unring a bell.
Okay.
So once you say something, it's out there in the osmos. I think the best thing you can do when you say something that you really regret is apologize. Let that person know that you're sorry for what you said, and you may want to address the effect that it had on them. Hey, I know when I said X to you, it must have really hurt your feelings. I know that it was damaging to our relationship, and it's not how I really feel, and you probably want to address what your real feelings are in that moment. But most importantly, don't keep making that mistake. You can only say you're sorry so many times before it's meaningless. And anger tends to erode relationships over time. So, you can get angry once or twice or, over the span of a 30-year marriage. I'm sure you've gotten angry at your husband many, many times, as he has with you, and that's normal. But if you're behaving in a way that is destructive to the relationship, there's just only so many sorries that are meaningful, and then it's diluted.
Okay, so now you're an expert in anger management. Do you ever lose it?
Good question. Do I ever lose it?
The truth, please. We won't tell anybody.
We'll put your picture up on the website. You don't indulge in the chubby hubby problem.
Yeah,
so do you
sure.
lose it?
I do get angry, and anyone who says that they don't get angry is probably either in denial or they're lying. But like I said earlier, there's a difference between feeling angry and behaving angry. And I try really hard not to behave in an angry way, but definitely there are things that upset me. So I'm not immune to that, even though it's an area of specialization for me.
And what's something that you do when you feel that anger welling up? You're not behaving that way. Do you have another outlet that do you sit and stew?
I don't sit and stew.
Do you
Well,
what's an outlet that you can use to?
For me personally, I'm very athletic, and so I find exercise to be the best thing for me in terms of just relieving stress and frustration that I might be building up. I'm an avid surfer, so I spend a lot of time in the ocean, and that's what I do. And I recommend to other people to find physical outlets. Physical exercise is one of the most important things you can do to relieve stress and feel better.
Note to self, drop the ice cream and go buy a surfboard.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Novick. We appreciate you taking the time to share the reasons behind anger and some very helpful tools on how to deal with anger. So now to learn more about your group and the work that your team does. Can you give us the website and some information if they want to learn more about you?
Sure. My agency is the AJ Novick Group. We're based in Laguna Beach in Orange County, California. The website address is www.ajnovickgroup.com. And you can,
And that's Novick.
Novick, yeah, AJ Novick Group.
Well, it was such a pleasure having you.
It was. Thank you so much. And what an education.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming down.
Well, I appreciate being here. Bonnie the Gangsta, Katrina the Hurricane.
that is us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening in. In the next segment, we would love to hear from you. What are some of the things that really make you mad? And what do you do when you're having a hard time getting a grip on anger?
Well, thank you, Mike and MB Studio Services, our sponsors, and all the creative people who've made our humble little show possible. And a special thanks to Pat Keenan for our music. Say goodbye, Katrina.
Goodbye, Katrina.